Good afternoon, folks, and welcome to the Pervasive Media Studio Lunchtime Talk. These talks are live every Friday at 1 p.m., both here in the building and live online. Hi, if you're watching us online. So whether you're in Bristol or you're far away, you can join in the conversation. My name is Martin O'Leary. I'm the studio community lead here. I'm a white man in my 40s, long hair and a beard, wearing a grey t-shirt that I bought in Svalbard, trying to channel some Arctic energy today. Every Friday, we throw open the doors of the Pervasive Media Studio for Open Studio Friday, where we offer you the chance to spend some time in our space, hot desking alongside our residents and staff from 10 a.m. to 5 p.m. Today, it is extremely hot desking. An especially big welcome to those who are new to the studio. Can anyone who's new to the studio put your hand up? Okay, got quite a few today. Welcome. This bit is for you. What is the Pervasive Media Studio? We're a diverse and collaborative community exploring creativity and technology, everything from comedy to coding and product development to performance art. And we're a partnership between Watershed, UE Bristol and the University of Bristol, and funded by Arts Council England. And what we do is we offer studio space, including desks, meeting rooms, events and opportunities, all for free to our residents as part of a spirit of generosity and mutual exchange. And most of all, we're a space for people to take risks with embryonic ideas and to make some time for collaboration. So just a few notes before we begin. Please do feel free to move around, grab a glass of water or whatever from the kitchen. It is very warm. As I keep saying, we have a quiet space just next to this space. So to my left, your right, the space in there, it has an air conditioner. It's really nice in there. If you need to take a break at any point, it's also fairly well soundproof. There's some bean bags and sofas and things. We're not expecting a fire drill today. If you hear a fire alarm, probably real. The studio team will direct you, but in any event, the fire exits are at the other end of the studio. Again, my left, your right, at opposite end. And then there are accessible toilets, including baby change, over there in the corridor next to the kitchen. There will be a Q&A at the end of this talk. If you're watching online, please pop your questions into the YouTube chat. Lautim is here. He will be your voice in the room today. If you are in the building, raise your hand and we'll send around a microphone so that Amelia can hear you. You can get news on all of our future talks by heading to watershed.co.uk/studio, at Pervasive Media Studio at mastodon.social on Mastodon, at pmstudiouk.bsky.social on Blue Sky, or at Pervasive Media Studio on Instagram. I've just today noticed that we have been advertising our Twitter handle on here for the past year while I have been saying we're not on Twitter anymore. But we're not on Twitter anymore. We don't use it. Please get your information elsewhere. All right. Our speaker for today is Amelia Winger-Bearskin. Amelia is an artist and technologist from the Seneca-Cayuga Nation of Oklahoma. She is the Banks Endowed Chair of AI in the Arts at the University of Florida, where she founded the AI Climate Justice Lab. And today she's going to share her work combining immersive storytelling and ethical AI to address climate change, housing, and the design of Indigenous-led systems of care and kinship. Unfortunately, Amelia wasn't able to be here in person as we'd originally planned, but she is joining us live via the internet. So please join me in giving a very warm welcome to Amelia.
Hello, thank you. I'm so honored to be here. I am so sorry I wasn't able to be here in person. I will be back to Bristol over the next year, and I look forward to meeting many of the artists and residents as well as community members. For accessibility reasons, I am a middle-aged woman who is a Native American, indigenous to the northeast region of the United States and Canada. I have medium-length brown hair and I wear a striped jacket as well as a dentillon necklace. Thank you so much. I'm going to be moving my slides verbally, so we can move to the next slide. And I just want to mention that if you have any burning questions or clarifications throughout my talk, feel free to raise your hand and stop me at any time. I am a professor and I'm very used to questions. Me and my students have very boisterous classrooms and they know they can always stop me at any time, and I just want to let you know that as well. On this third slide here, this is a project of a film called Fancy Dance, which is streaming on Apple. If you have seen the film, if not, I highly recommend it. Director and producer Erica Tremblay, who's from the same small tribal nation as me, the Seneca-Cayuga Nation of Oklahoma, invited me to collaborate on her remarkable film. I created the virtual reality experience featured in the movie. One scene includes a futuristic cornfield where the character Roki plays in VR. In this scene, Lily Gladstone's character Jax receives bad news via a phone call, while Roki is immersed in her VR experience. Later, there's a sequence where Roki runs through the cornfield at the end of the film, and red and blue police lights are flashing. The VR pastel version is representing a sky world and foreshadowing the film's climax. No spoilers. This film is groundbreaking, as in it was the first feature film shot on our tribal reservation and the very first film shot using the Cayuga language. So we're just so terribly proud of her, Erica Tremblay's dedication, and the outstanding performances by Lily Gladstone and the rest of the cast were incredible. So I highly recommend checking out this film, and I was really happy to be a part of it and wanted to showcase the ways in which immersive storytelling can work, especially with issue topics like this film covers. We can go to the next slide. This is a project that began at the Next Museum in Amsterdam. And these are some of the images that we then turned into a larger installation. And we can go to the next slide. So the thought process behind this film is to think about who determines the protocol for looking at the sky. Like moss, fungi, animals, and plants, and indeed most living beings, the sky does not have borders. It moves and is part of a larger system that includes the moon, the sun, the stars. I have this midnight project as well as a companion to a larger project called Skyworld Cloud World, which is a series that explores themes of communication networks throughout the skies using video, musical compositions, and physical installations. I was inspired to make this work when I heard a politician lay claim to the universal ethical protocol for looking at the sky. And I started to think about all the ways that one person, one politician, or even one corporation thinks of owning the sky. The laws that treat airspace as territory or extensions of the land, the regulations governing what kinds of frequencies we can emit across the open air, geographic information systems whose satellite we can see if the night is clear enough. And if we go to the next slide, this is a shot from the installation. So you can see the woman that's standing in front of it. She's taller than me, I'm quite sure. So she's actually quite taller than me, but you can kind of see the scale of what the installation looked like at the Next Museum. And anyone who's maybe been there, I highly recommend checking it out. We can go to the next slide. And you can see some ways in which people can move and truly be immersed within those large scale projection mapped spaces using, I think, about 6 projectors for this one. And that's to say this is all part of, what the community has dubbed extended reality, where it's not only just in headsets or virtual reality or augmented reality, but also this sort of way of walking into a media space. We can go to the next slide. And this is another piece called Two Bodies, which is within the series, which was based on a couple of poems that I wrote. And it has the two bodies here as somewhat of future ancestors. If you move to the next slide, there's another image of how sort of you can see the scale and the way that people moved around in the piece. At the opening, they could even lay down and hear it. It has a very large 360 audio rig around it as well. And the audio is both nature sounds that I recorded in my hometown, as well as compositions that I wrote and me singing. And you can kind of hear it move around the space. So many people would choose to kind of lay down in that space and experience the sound as well as the visuals around them. You can move to the next slide. And here's the final image of people in the space. And I had such a tremendous time, so wonderful to show this at the Next Museum. And a couple of other museums and film festivals wanted to share this piece as well. However, as many of us in the room are aware, these types of immersive installations take quite a bit of planning and effort. In the Next Museum, this was one of their inaugural shows, but they had, many years of preparing this screen. And so I decided to make a version or a part of this series that could be shown on a more traditional film screen so that I could share this at film festivals and other museums that didn't have access to this type of media projection display. If we go to the next slide, I created a 10-minute version in this series that showcased. There's a couple of different film festivals that it showed at. It debuted at Imaginative, which is the largest Indigenous film and media and art festival in the world, and it takes place annually in Canada and in Toronto. And it showed at a couple of different film festivals and has been touring for a while in different locations. Currently, it's on view at the Exploratorium in San Francisco on Pier 15, alongside some other physical objects that are part of the series as well. And you can go to the next slide. Just a note on some of the algorithms that I used to make this piece. I used image inpainting, which is a technique from the field of artificial intelligence that's historically used to reconstruct missing regions in an image, like an old antique image that may have wrinkles or a missing bit that has deteriorated over time or was lost, or for object removal and image restoration. I use this technique subversively by inpainting to erase the prominent human architecture of the videos that I took, reminding us that backward-looking prediction erases a possible future. I also use digital image interpolation, which is when an image is resized or distorted from one pixel grid to another, and it gives the film a liquid morphing process, almost like breathing. And so when you look out into the landscape, for me, I find that hypnotic and out of time. And if we go to the next slide, we can see a small clip from this film with the audio that I wrote and I'm performing in. Great. So this next, and it's a very short clip from a project that I did that was commissioned by the Whitney Museum of American Art here in New York City. And you can press play on that clip. It doesn't have sound. And it shows just a brief clip of what happens with this project called Sunrise and Sunset. And this is a project where artists take over the whole entire website of the Whitney Museum of American Art and showcase projects when visitors visit the website. So this is a really wonderful project that is curated by Christiane Paul. And I combined animations and poems connecting the sunrise and sunset to indigenous creation myths. The sky world of the sunrise references our Haudenosaunee origin story of Sky Woman, who belonged to the sky people, rooted in the celestial heavens before the world was created. After falling through a hole created by an uprooted tree, Sky Woman creates a home on Earth out of the oceans and mud with the help of the animals. I pair these abstract animations of dawn, created in a game engine, with the question, who benefits from your burnout? using it as a prompt for reflecting on the sharing of life. In the death/world of sunset, I ask the question, what is made bright by the loss of your light? And it hints at the thin veil between sleep and death while evoking renewal. The accompanying animation mixes abstract visuals with video clips of my own self that I created as a part of my artwork in my early career. This work has disappeared, and the footage was recovered from the Internet Archive, a testament both to the ephemerality of digital work and the potential of recovery. The questions that I raise in these works, I created originally as a set of billboards by the artist collective Four Freedoms, of which I'm a member. And the next slide shows another clip from the web series. They're very brief. They have some interactive buttons on them as well, so that when visitors would visit the Whitney site, it would take over the whole site at sunrise and sunset. And then you couldn't kind of go anywhere else. You would just be seeing these art activations. And then they had buttons where you could change and interact with the text as well as the visuals. Okay, we can go to the next slide, which I think is just another clip of the videos of this series, which I think is a really fun way of having art and those internet audiences who are engaging with your museum to connect with artists in new ways. It's a very fun project. And then our next slide is about some work that I have done with artificial intelligence. As mentioned in my intro, I'm the founder and director of the AI Climate Justice Lab. But I have created many labs in my life. I'm very passionate about creating space for not just my own work, but to foster the work of others. I created the DBRS Innovation Labs as a group of designers, coders, and quants who are dedicated to breaking new ground in financial technology. And most of what our creative applications were around filmmaking, art, virtual reality as ways of probing the possibilities of machine learning technologies. And this was in 2015 to 2016. And if we go to the next slide, I also created Idea New Rochelle in collaboration with the New Rochelle mayor's office and the bid. And the Idea New Rochelle was dedicated to promoting and developing and maintaining a vibrant new arts district and technology district, working with the city of New Rochelle's downtown business improvement district. We had an artificial intelligence lab with supercomputers and motion capture lab. We can go to the next slide. Um, we won the New Rochelle Mayor's Challenge, where for which was used to have virtual reality tools to collaborate in the design and space of the citizens and city planners of their downtown. We brought tools from cutting edge or immersive technology to design New Rochelle together with the community and city leadership in partnerships with architectural firms. Um, and New Rochelle it used to be a part of the Bronx, which is one of the five boroughs of New York City, and it kind of separated into its own city. I'm not entirely sure when, but before I was born. So that's kind of a location of it in case you're not familiar with the sort of New York City area. The next slide. We had a lot of wonderful artists in residence. And when I say artists in residence, similarly to the Watershed, they had a workspace as well as connection to many different forms of technology and tools like motion capture, but we even had a molecular gastronomy lab, different types of digital fabrication studios. And for at least three of the artists who chose, they lived actually at the maker space. We had three furnished apartments and in a kitchen that was all above the New Rochelle train station, so that artists could live and be in residence like quite physically all the time, as well as making, which was very fun. And the next slide, we also helped create, our molecular gastronomy lab, VR, MR, AR, digital fabrication tools, and it was a space for startup artists and thinkers, entrepreneurs, and educators to collaborate and develop with community makers. One of our main partners was the New Rochelle School District, and so many of our residents would also host workshops with the younger generations through the school departments and at the schools. Next slide, and I think we'll move past this slide. I think we'll go ahead to slide 25. Another thing that we did as part of Idea New Rochelle is to also incubate film projects. And if we'll kind of advance, there you go, that's the perfect slide. So this film we brought to our studios at Idea New Rochelle. And if you look at the kind of photos that shows that they're at an apartment, that's actually a large space that we had in our residency that the film Egg turned into their apartment. I think it was supposed to be an apartment in Bushwick. And it was set up about these sort of three characters and looking at different ways in which motherhood affects people in their lives. And when the producer and actress Alicia Rayner came to me, she wanted to create a virtual reality experience within the film. It's part of the storytelling that one of the characters is an artist, and she makes virtual reality as part of her practice. But she wanted to commission, an artist that already worked in this space to create the virtual reality experience, as well as to have the virtual reality experience available when they were debuting the film and having it tour in film festivals. It debuted at Tribeca Film Festival in New York. And so this virtual reality piece that I made was called Your Hands or Feet, and it's both featured in the film as well as a standalone experience that audiences could enjoy. And it also won the Engadget virtual reality prize. And I have a clip from the behind the scenes and the making of that piece in the next slide.
There is that really crazy sound effect when the giant's leg gets shaved. That's this really strange sponge that I bought. That's the worst sponge ever. Like, it's so bad at scrubbing dishes. And we sat there and we were listening to it and we were like, this is the sound of shaving a giant's leg. This is perfect. I started out kind of my creative career as a writer, and I was really interested in kind of experimental writing that leverage different aspects of new technologies. So I got to this point where I was like, it's really fun to think about technology and how it's impacting us, but I would really rather be working directly with the technologies. I went to a grad program called ITP, and I learned how to code. In my last year of grad school, VR suddenly came onto the scene as like something that was going to be accessible for us to use.
Sarah was the first person I had met as an artist who was just working in VR in a more playful way. We just started brainstorming and thinking of moments when you virtually give someone a piece of your life, like in daily life. If I'm talking to Sarah and I'm trying to explain to her how I felt that morning or what I was thinking about the future, very frequently we prototype those kinds of experiences with sayings or with metaphors. So I can say, like, I walked into that room and my stomach just dropped, or it was so loud that I felt like my ears were bleeding.
Your Hands or Feet is a VR experience. It's an interactive exploration of new metaphors. The experience starts off where you're in kind of this surreal looking kitchen and you have in front of you a half dozen carton of eggs, and inside of each egg is contained an experience that has some kind of psychologically complex action to it that we hope acts as something that you think back on and you're like, wow, this is such a strange feeling. It kind of reminds me of, for instance, like that time that I felt like my hands were feet.
I don't know. I feel like my mind is a confusing machine.
What we're really doing here is we're creating these metaphors that maybe don't exist but might apply in a situation as the perfect way to describe this thing.
In the beginning, I started with a basic treatment, so I created a lot of 3D assets to just sort of mock up this world, sort of the look and feel. And we came up with this idea of having it be like a half dozen experiences from, a half egg carton and how we would move from each space.
Landing on the visuals for any project is an interesting process. You have to make something that feels true to something that you like, but it also has to be something true to what the other person likes.
Sarah said she had this amazing friend, Neve Bavarsky in LA, who was an illustrator. We reached out to Neve and showed him all of the reference imagery, showed him our very tight color palette of what we were trying to go for. And we were like, can you do the Neve version of your hands or feet universe?
And then from there, we were like, how are we gonna put this thing together? Because translating from 2D into 3D seems easy, but to keep the same visual style is not always so straightforward. It made a lot of sense for us to approach it with a style that's inviting and not depressing or scary, but just a little bit scary maybe.
It's really helpful to take those two concepts and then give it to one person that can execute that so that it stays really consistent.
So we were like, let's try this tool, Medium, which is a 3D VR sculpting tool. And so we felt like, oh, this is perfect that we found this way to find a slice of what we were interested in, a way that we can produce it in a really organic and fun way. And that's kind of how we landed on the visual style that we're at right now.
A lot of our music is going to be generative. So generative music is when you're really designing those whys, therefores, and ifs.
Normally you listen to a song and it's got the beginning and the middle of the end and there's nothing you can do about it. But in an interactive song, there's ways that you can alter parts of it so that way you're sort of participating with the music. Every object that you pick up is contains an audio track. Depending on which objects you interact with, you're really flushing out what the soundscape of that environment is.
Me and Sarah are doing all this work to create a really fun playground. We might have kind of serious concepts about the emotional resonance behind each of the interactions, which we have very long and engaged conversations about, even the physicality of grabbing that object, to that action has to be connected. So we want each of the interactions to also be analogous to a place and time that you might have had that feeling.
When I look at it from an outside perspective, I'm like, a lot of these things have to do with frustration, but a lot of them also have to do with joy and feeling joy while doing something frustrating.
And so I want to give people a moment where they can interact with that quality of VR, where they can say, this is an extension of my brain and my experience within the world. This isn't the real world, this is the computational amalgamation of human understanding in this world, and I want to give people an opportunity to interact with that and interface with that.
When we explain it to people, they just get it and they're excited about it, even though it's oh, it's an experience where your hands are feet, because don't you ever just feel a weird feeling and you don't know how to describe it and it's something you've never felt before? Well, isn't VR the perfect way to kind of explore that? And people are like, oh yeah, that makes perfect sense. And I'm like, really? So that's been pretty surprising also.
Okay, let's move on to the next slide. So this is a project called Wampum Codes, which is a toolkit, a workshop, and a practical application of ethical articulation for builders, coders, designers, and makers based on Indigenous values of co-creation. In computer programming, when we need to reference another piece of software, we often call that a dependency. And in software development, a dependency, we can go to the next slide, sorry. In software development, a dependency is as good as law. So it's better maybe because one module needs the other in order to run. It literally can't work otherwise. So this means that dependencies are effectively a way that developers impose some sort of conditions on any application using their work. But technology doesn't exist in a vacuum. New technologies have immense ethical effects. And I wondered, what is the ethical analog of a dependency? So, how could software developers and other technologists make sure that their work is deployed in accordance with a certain set of values? I created Wampum Codes while I was a Mozilla Fellow embedded at the MIT Co-Creation Studio. And this project was made possible in generous support with the John D. and Catherine T. MacArthur Foundation and the Sundance Institute. Next slide. So part of what we created in Wampum Codes was this ethical framework for software development, a way in which I could workshop and help surface the values that interdisciplinary teams who are building technological products could talk about and articulate their values. Wampum Codes doesn't tell people what values they should have, but rather gives them a framework to surface the values that the teams want to center. Often, many people in the team don't feel empowered to talk about ethics within software development or are unsure if the values that they hold are the same as others. This, of course, fellowship was in 2020, where I was supposed to be embedded, in person at MIT. But because we needed to go remote in 2020, I pivoted slightly. So if we go to the next slide, rather than having a documentary film, we had a podcast and a live stream and a science story platform. And it's named after wampum, which is a craft of weaving beads into patterns representing contracts and other agreements, which was practiced by my tribe and other adjacent tribes in our region. Just like the craft that serves as its namesake, Wampum Codes is a recording of the stories, ideas, and wisdom that is collected through conversations with other Native people who are using technology to make a positive impact on their community. In the show, I interview many people from my tribe and many others using technology to share their values with the world. The next slide. Part of what came out of this fellowship in collaboration with the many other wonderful co-authors is this book called Collective Wisdom, Co-Creating Media for Equity and Justice from MIT Press. So, how to co-create and why? The emergence of media co-creation as a concept and as a practice grounded in equity and justice. Co-creation is everywhere. How the internet was built. It's generated massive prehistoric rock carvings. It powered the development of vaccines. Co-creation offers alternatives to the idea of the solitary author, privileged by top-down media. But co-creation is easy to miss, as individuals often take credit for and profit from collective forms of authorship, erasing whole cultures and narratives as they do so. Collective Wisdom offers the first guide to co-creation as a concept and a practice tracing co-creation in media making that ranges from collaborative journalism to human AI partnerships. We can go to the next slide. So as I mentioned in the beginning of my talk, I am the founding director of the AI Climate Justice Lab at the University of Florida, which is using AI technology to transform housing, health, and human thriving for a sustainable future. Go to the next slide. In the last 3 years, we were focused primarily on the global water crisis. And this was a slide that one of our collective of the Talk to Me About Water collective created to talk about our ethics and values, where we are collaborating with coders, storytellers, and creatives. We can go to the next slide. And water scientists and researchers, and centering Indigenous voices. We would interpret and repurpose water data and then showcase this work at cultural and political institutions like libraries, museums, open source communities to spark more conversations. Some of the ways in which the global water crisis is being talked about, it centers around a lot of prediction and analysis and understanding of water data, but oftentimes people need time and space to situate and accept new types of information, especially when it's concerning or can heighten their anxiety. So we find that the different ways in which we hold these conversations in space can allow people to have the time and space to connect empathetically to this issue space so that they can begin to take action rather than live in a state of climate panic. I often like to think of Indigenous voices as messages from the future, because although the water crisis will affect all of us, at the current moment, it's affecting Indigenous people most acutely. Learning from their experience and understanding it is like seeing what will be all of our futures very soon. So that's why we center Indigenous voices in this space. Next slide. So, the AI Climate Justice Lab collaborates with a diverse international cohort to uncover hidden patterns in healthcare technology and leverage AI to address global homelessness, housing loss, and to promote human thriving. Selected AI Climate Lab activities from 2021 till the present is that we're a partner of Community Solutions in the movement to end homelessness and working with AI solutions for housing loss and its downstream effects on homelessness related to climate emergencies, but also thinking of housing resilience within city planning. Talk to Me About Water, which I mentioned, was a cohort of Indigenous technologists creating experiences for DWeb Camp in 2022, Unfinished Live 2022, and the Lower Manhattan Cultural Center in 2023. Next slide. So that's just a little bit about co-creation. We can go to the next slide after that. Actually, I think I'm going to push through all the way to the end because I'm seeing that we're like at 8:30, or my time, 8:37, sorry. So let's push through to the last slide of 38, where I just wanted to say, or actually we could go to the slide before, sorry. 37 has a nice message on it too, which is just to say that the brilliance of the community gathered in this room and the spirit of this community is what makes co-creation a powerful tool for building towards justice. And I look forward to connecting more deeply with the Watershed and your community over the next year. And my last slide just says Nyawe, which is the way in which we say thank you in both the Seneca and the Cayuga language. And I would love to take your questions and listen to your stories as well. Thank you so much for having me.
All right, thank you very much, Amelia. Do we have any questions in the room? All right.
Hi there.
Yeah, you're good.
Yeah, okay. I don't know much about AI except for, I guess, maybe ChatGPT. That's about it. I mean, I am aware that it's been used in other, I guess, fields and sectors. But in your presentation, you referred to a few things which imply some practical, other varieties of use of AI. And one of them was AI solutions for housing loss. So obviously, like you used that term a few times throughout your presentation, so there's obviously something rather specific potentially that hides behind that term that you know what it means. But so it would be good to hear about some examples of that.
Thank you so much for that question. Something that's very near and dear to my practice, and something that I'll be working closely with the Watershed to surface is how we can think about communities and housing resilience and the prevention of housing loss and its downstream effects on homelessness. Currently, I've won an American Council of Learned Societies grant of digital data sovereignty, or digital data justice grant, where I'm working with New America as well as Bright Community Trust to create a map of the ways in which AI can make a strategic impact. Some of it is surfacing indicators. What are some of the key indicators that predicts housing loss? Two would be ways in which we could break down agentic automations to help people connect them with services, and ways in which services can then also explain and communicate to policymakers and those who are looking to have solutions for housing loss and its downstream effects on homelessness. Unfortunately, homelessness in the United States and Canada, and even with our global network, is something that there is very little data on. We don't have something like a national housing loss index, which is something that others on my team are passionately advocating for. If you cannot measure a problem, you cannot solve it. And so a lot of what we're dealing with, even though AI is a data-driven field and requires an enormous amount of data, we're hoping that AI can both help model the type of data that we desperately need and what what we don't have, or the ways in which we can use passive data collection that in the past would have been too difficult to connect a multiplicity of data sources to be able to surface indicators of housing loss or predicting housing loss. Whereas now some AI technologies are better suited to utilizing some of these unstructured data sources. One example might be, and in the United States we call them 311 calls, but I'm not entirely sure in the UK what you might call them, but effectively emergency calls or other types of lower emergency calls that you may have to call centers that help direct people who are in need to different services. And that unstructured data is rarely used as any type of predictive indicator to see how that person may be at risk of experiencing housing loss. One example of a predictive indicator that was surfaced through just not through AI, but through practical data science was that, and this is not going to be shocking to anyone in the room, but if somebody falls behind on a utility payment, not paying for their electricity, not paying for their water, it's almost a one-to-one correlation that that person will experience housing loss in a couple of months. That's not surprising to any of us. We understand those economic indicators. However, could one of those types of indicators be sent to an outreach facility to give them an automation via text message saying, hey, there's a grant. We've already inputted all your information from your utilities. This grant helps you prevent housing loss. It's much less expensive for both the individual as well as the city, as well as service providers, as well as the landlords for that person to remain housed and housing stabilized rather than move into that critical juncture of becoming homeless. So that is just like one example of the way in which AI efficiencies we believe can surface these types of indicators, create automations that can then connect people to services. Right now, a lot of cities are scattering money in a very non-strategic way because we don't have the data of exactly the key points in time when it can make a difference between having someone move through that space of housing loss. So we're up against a lot of issues when it comes to a lack of data sanity, and also a lack of data sovereignty. So we are hoping to map out ways in which AI can have strategic interventions, and then over the next few years, deploy some of those in tests with cities. Of course, we're primarily focused on Orange County and Florida because that is where Bright Community Trust is giving out grants to people to prevent them from losing their houses, and they're a wonderful partner in this. But our first step is sort of to map all those spaces, talk to the people who are leaders and experts in this space, ask them for feedback, make sure that we're doing work in that co-creation spirit, and then continue on from there. So I'm in the beginning of my journey, and I'm very happy to kind of continue to connect both with the Watershed and the community in Bristol around this work to share some of the ways in which we are making sure that we center people with lived experience, community members, and those who are experts in the housing space to make sure that we are only deploying those methods in ways that are helpful to the community and not harmful.
Any other questions from the room?
Hello. Great talk. Thank you very much. 2 questions. Most important one, what's the weather like where you are? Is it hot? It's very hot here, but the Watershed mercifully is very cool. Second question, in terms of your practice and what you do you draw deliberately at all from social psychology, which is group psychology, and the psychology of how groups behave and how groups interact? Because Bristol has a great history of involvement with social psychology, especially with the work of Henri Tajfel, Tajfel, who did a lot of interesting work around intergroup discrimination. Is that something that you've looked at all in your work?
Thank you so much for that question. Yes, it is very hot here in New York right now. My friend last night said it's like walking down the street is like swimming through molasses. So it is quite hot and muggy in New York. I am in a hotel room, so it's quite air conditioned here. But outside, yes, it's quite a swamp here in Manhattan. But to answer your question about social psychology, I myself am not a social psychologist. I have in my career collaborated with a wonderful expert in psychology. Her speciality is within creativity and storytelling in public spaces. Dr. Sarana Pringle from the Yale School of Medicine's Emotional Intelligence Lab. And some of the training that I have received in my life, as well as worked in co-creation, is with sociologists, which is very different than social psychologists, but that's sort of the basis with which I have connected with city planners, is through some of that urban sociology. But the reason why I was so keen to collaborate with the Watershed is I am aware of their deep dedication to working in community and with community in really creative and unique ways that are fundamentally centered within the values of the community and understanding the types of ethical ways in which to move in that direction. Whereas, with AI, there are a lot of harms that I often map for city leaders to talk about the ways in which it can be used not from a community-centered way, in a way that can actually cause harm. And so I'm really looking forward to collaborating with the community and learning more about that history, because I am aware that Bristol has been quite a leader in that space.
Hello, thank you so much for your talk. I'm someone that's completely new and until now, well, still, I'm a little bit skeptic about AI because I have heard just how much water consumption it can cause. And I don't know if this is fake news or not, but this is one of the reasons why I was attracted to this talk, because I want to kind of learn how it works. And it seems like you're doing the quite opposite. And so if you think, I don't know, my question is around like it can be sustainable and how can we make it more? Like, are there some of the ChatGPT or Gemini, is there some of them are more sustainable, or I don't know if you understand, but which ways we can make it more sustainable? Yes, as personal use.
Yes, and it's true. I don't work as much on consumer personal use tools. I'm much more focused in like a city level way. However, it's been part of the research at my lab as well as the broader research at my university to look at sustainability. We have a couple of different initiatives that model water use with AI, as well as like our own supercomputer that we have at our university, at least in North America, is the most it's the most energy efficient. However, AI takes an enormous amount of energy. And I think there needs to be a real dedication to understanding when and why AI should be used, and also how in which to make it ethical towards our environment and our resources. There's absolutely no part of me that believes that the way that we're doing it now is the most ecologically conscious. It absolutely is not. We are moving towards mass energy consumption. A lot of locations in the United States have horrible new unregulated air pollution, water scarcity that's affecting communities that have been marginalized throughout our history, and it's reaching a crisis point. And so I believe that there are strategic ways in which you can use AI and also limit its use to prevent these downstream effects on our environment, quality of life, illness that are happening in children. All these things are crisis issues, the same way that homelessness is too. And so I think that we have many ways of innovating as humans towards like the rapid creation of innovations for commercial success. And if that same type of energy was dedicated in ways in which we could move our technologies in a more eco-friendly way, it's completely possible. It's only a matter of values and ethical alignment. And we used to, I did a tour recently of looking at the first Apollo crafts that landed on the moon and did the first moon missions. And these were created with computational systems that were gold and copper wire, that were vacuum tubes and glass. So computers have been many different things throughout their lifetime and consumed many different types of energy. If our goal was to make a computational system that was eco-friendly, we absolutely can do that. The abacus can perform complex Turing-complete computations. Wampum and Kipu from other indigenous people of North and South America also were able to make Turing-complete computations. So it is completely possible to have a computational device that could biodegrade within a month. If we wanted to center that rather than what we have centered, which is a massive profit, it is possible. But it's absolutely necessary for the brightest minds to dedicate their times to that, and for nations and those in power to embrace the survival of our planet.
Anybody else? Questions? Well, in that case, there we go.
Hello. What do you mean by AI, and what's the difference between what you mean by AI and the personal AI tools like ChatGPT?
So artificial intelligence is a broader field, like saying computers, right? So there are computers that are used to help you maintain traffic lights. There are computers that help you with your water pumping systems of a city. And then there's a personal computer that you may use, or that I'm using right now. I'm using I'm using a laptop right now in order to zoom in. So that's like more of a personal computation device. And those are very similar and very different than the types of industrial computers that run a city power grid or run a city water pump supply. And so I think that's similar when it comes to artificial intelligence. Is there are tools that anyone can use, and they type in prompts, and they may have that type of interaction. But that is a very small subset of the larger field of artificial intelligence. Does that help describe what I'm talking about a little bit better, or answer your question?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
Hi. Yes, thank you for your talk. I was going to ask a question about that's sort of more specifically about Wampum Codes and that kind of idea of co-creation, and specifically, and this concept of dependency as you used it. I thought that was quite a nice analogy. But with that issue, like, how did you think about the sort of bits where co-creation and this more collaborative approach butt up against dependencies that are very much been driven by like private capital and these more sort of like less collaborative approaches, and also, how do you keep things collaborative and prevent that kind of ego-driven sort of individualization that happens when people try to take credit for things? Like, how did you build that into the systems with essentially just around that? That makes sense.
Thank you so much for that question. Yeah, no, I appreciate that. And most of the people that would invite me in to do Wampum Codes workshops, some of them were startups, some were art and media, film festivals, museums, so very different types of groups, from like nonprofit to startup to for-profit businesses. And when they bring me in, they obviously have already made a commitment to think about their ethics and values, right? So I'm already not necessarily working with people who are resistant to that concept. Like, they're bringing me in because they're like, we want this, right? So that sort of eliminates in some way, people aren't hiring me if they're bad actors, right? They're like, we want this in for our technical teams. And usually it's technical teams that are requesting it to their leadership. And something that I would require is, whoever is the head of the company needs to be there in the meetings in order to legitimize how important this space is. So if it's a startup, I want the founder to be there. If it's nonprofit, I want, whoever's the highest executive to be in that room, not as a leader, but as a listener, to show that oftentimes technical teams feel as though, like, who are we supposed to say? We imagine there's a downstream negative ethical impact of some of the work we're doing. Oftentimes what I would hear the most frequently from teams is like, no one cares, or we don't know who to tell. And I'll bring in this top leadership to say they're here. They can surface either the protocols or people in place, or take accountability right there and then. Secondly, as people begin to surface their values, we talk a lot in the process around protocols. There are many different types of protocols with which you can shut down unethical uses of your technology. And they range anywhere from, if it's an open source project, you may state, every Friday we have this open Zoom call from our community where users or contributors to our open source code base can communicate with us around things that they see that could have unethical applications or go against our sort of community agreed ethics or values. So that's like a very non-technical way, like, hey, talk to us, right? That's not very technical, but it is a protocol. To something that's a lot more technical, like you could state within your community agreements that any non-ethical uses of this code base, if reported to us via a pull request or a get blame request, will trigger a review. And if the review of your application is deemed to be outside our community standard guidelines, like your API access token is revoked, right? So that's like a more automated way in which you can have enforcement, or all the way to something that's less automated and more just like, here's how you have a conversation with us in our community. Here's how you contribute to the values and ethics that we have stated within our code base, right? So those are just kind of examples that different groups have surfaced as ways of protocols and as an enforcement, as well as clear articulation. I like to use the example of like, what if I was a web developer and I was working with many different developers to create an open source website for an animal shelter for cats, because I love cats, and I'm like, I want to take my free time on the weekends and I want to help a local shelter build this website. And then, I'm going to open source this because I really would like any shelter to be able to use this website because I am so dedicated to helping cats. And then I think to myself, well, I've spent all this free time, and so have my friends, and I've gotten like a large community of about 40 people who are sort of maintaining this, and we're all giving our free time to this. But we don't really want to do this to a shelter that is a kill shelter, right? That doesn't have the access to be able to help animals, that is just going to kill them. It's our free time, right? We should be able to decide what we're creating and co-creating, where the values and ethics end. And so we may say, it's free for anyone to use this. However, if you're a kill shelter, like, you're not allowed to use this. And please, anyone report if they're using this code base to us, and we will, talk to them and revoke this license. So it's somewhat like an ethical license. A lot of different technologists, and I was in community, at MIT, so I talked to their MIT open source license, because that's one of the limitations that I see with that open source license. Is right now the only thing that can trigger sort of a legal situation with open source is if someone closed sources it, not if someone uses it in a way that's ethically non-compliant with its original goal. A lot of citizen scientists, as well as academic scientists who've created open source projects, have seen like military or violent applications of their research, where they were researching how to map stars for a beautiful app, and then someone's using that as a missile guidance system, and they have no way of saying that they can't do that because the people aren't closed sourcing it. They're just using it in a way that they thought, wow, if I had these 200 people for 2 years building this open source project, that's actually not what we hoped would be the application. We hoped it would be for citizen science, for children to learn about the stars. And now all of our work is being used in this way that's against our core ethics. So we are trying to think of ways in which we can enforce for those people who choose to have value-based dependencies within their software project. I hope that helps answer your question.
I just had a bit of a follow-up question, I guess. I think it's really interesting what you were just saying, but I think at the beginning of it, you were talking about some of the applications in startups and for-profit business. And I guess coming from the perspective of someone who's worked on the kind of industrial and governmental systems that you were talking about, obviously there is a lot going on in those types of sectors that makes a huge difference in terms of how able we are to do good with AI. And I just wondered how much appetite there is. And obviously you said that people who you've run workshops for or engaged with tend to be people who have already expressed that, values and ethics are important to them. Just wondered how much potential you think there is for this type of thing to be adopted more widely in those, highly technical industries which aren't so overlapping with ethical and creative sectors.
Yeah, I think there's a couple of different reasons why companies are interested. I think one or two might be they had an incident, right, where something wasn't communicated. Then later they realized there was an unethical way of using their products and services, maybe even a way that led to illegal activity, and they want to say, wait a minute, was there anyone who could have predicted this? And oftentimes, yeah, there were people that were saying, hey, we're seeing people hacking or using this in a negative way. This could lead to either a negative perception with our customers, like a citation or a fine from different regulatory bodies, right? Like there's consequences if people are not just using it unethically, but illegally, right? And oftentimes it's the technical teams that knew and said, yes, actually, as we're building this, we know that we see that users are using it in this way, or we see the potential for this to be used in that way. And so it's, in some ways, it's protection for the companies, and they see that. So sometimes it's because they've had an incident. And sometimes it's that they want to differentiate themselves within the marketplace. They're like, one example was a blockchain company that was dedicated to clean energy. And so they were like, we want to indicate to our customers and our community that our core values are around green energy. And we want to make sure that all of the technological decisions we're making, none of them seem like we're standing on our word, right? That what we are saying to our community is seeing reflected in the way that we're building the technology. And they wanted that to go all the way through, because that's a way of first of all, like, the founders were dedicated to that. And secondly, it is a differentiator within the marketplace that makes people who are aligned with their values want to be a part of their customer community. So for some people, ethics and values is one of the core differentiators they have within the marketplace. And then thirdly, a lot of technical talent has indicated that they are willing to even take large pay cuts in order to work at technical organizations that align with their values. And so sometimes just shrewd businesses are aware that if they want the best technical talent, they have to actually keep in mind the values that are important to their technical community. And it's not always the case that ethics and values are in direct opposition to the profit and the product that they're trying to grow.
Obviously, Amelia is not here. She's not going to be able to hang around and chat, but we're hoping to see a lot more of her over the next year or so. So I guess come back. She might be here. All right, before you all go, if you want to stick around in Hot Desk today or find out more about what we do, please come find one of the studio team, and we'll be happy to help. Studio team, give us a wave. Here we are. And a banana. If you're watching online, drop us a line on studio@watershed.co.uk with any questions. Thank you all for being here today, and we'll see you again next time.